When these series of earthquakes took place on Thursday, I was driving around. I had to go do some errands, and I immediately, almost out of habit, I turned to KCBS. By the way, today is Thursday. This is the Rich Lieberman Media Pulse, and we are live on YouTube. And if you're watching live, great. If you're going to be watching later on, then welcome to the show. So, I turned to KCBS just out of habit. I'm in my car. I got, like many of you did, these alerts that sound off on your iPhone. I have an iPhone. And who did we have covering this on KCBS? Shane Guiness and Margie Shafer. And look, we have had, I'm going to get to this in a second. We've had big earthquakes off the coast of California, in fact, off the West Coast, period. And, this is not like in the movies where, most of the time, all the time, where there's this giant wave that's going to bury California. Folks, I put on KCBS and it was immediately gooey and it got progressively worse. Unintentionally hilarious. You talk about just not fit to do ad libs. This got comical. Specifically, first off, the fact that they let Shane Guinness continue on was indicative of nobody knows how to run the show at woeful KCBS. Margie Shafer. Sorry, Margie. My God, you're not even close to adequate. Listen to the tape. These two it was almost send in the clowns. It was hysterical. I started laughing. And I'm going to get to specifically why these two individuals were just atrocious and downright hilarious. But we've had these instances before. Routinely, the various powers that be, the National Weather Service, the earthquake predictors, the earthquake people, the emergency services people, routinely, folks, routinely have these warnings. And now that we are in the electronic internet age, we have these phones, iPhones, where you're going to get these warnings and all that. They do that out of the proverbial abundance of caution. Here's where you have seasoned journalists, who you have people that know the land, that know the background, that have kind of a historical perspective. You don't have that at KCBS. You have these two anchors, one of who should not have been on the desk, even if he was filling in. They should have gotten somebody in who has some degree of experience. I'm talking about Guinness himself. Guinness is a disaster. Speaking of disasters that were nothing close to a disaster. Margie Shafer, completely amateur performance. I'm sorry to say that. I'm just being honest. What were they doing? It was how they acted. They were hysterical. They were acting as if California was about to be swollen by a giant wave. That didn't happen, didn't even come close to happening. And again, folks, these agencies, they routinely put out these warnings. When there's an earthquake of 5.8, or later on there was a 7.0, but they were well off the coast in water. And because of the fact that these quakes were not very deep, there were not going to be any historical kind of a damage. Had these two individuals at KCBS knew that, or some of the people working behind the scenes advised them of that, perhaps we would have more controlled behavior, more non-hysterical, almost frantic-like behavior on KCBS, which is a joke. A joke. This is where this radio station is ridiculous. They were interviewing people in frequent, oh my God, frequent bits of dead air, of contacting various experts and individuals who were trying to convey caution, who were trying to say in so many words, with the exception of a few, that look, if you were near the coast, obviously take precaution, use common sense. But the hysterical manner in which both Shane Guinness and Margie Shafer conducted business was laughable, was absolutely laughable. And by the way, when I was able to get home and get to my palatial studios, I put on the local coverage and it was guarded. It was not frenetic. It wasn't crazy. In fact, I'm going to commend breaking news. Stop the presses. I'm going to commend, even though it was probably unintentional, I'm going to commend KTVU, which didn't break in to their regular scheduled programming. Several of you sent me, notices that KTVU didn't break into their programming. They probably don't have anybody manning what was taking place or news. But folks, get away from all your, historical movies and fictional movies about waves and all that. Now, had this taken place on land, there was an earlier quake that was centered up near Humboldt County, I guess, in a very sparsely populated area of California, way up north. And in theory, yes, had this been on land in a more populated area, God forbid, like San Francisco or LA or in the Central Valley, even. Well, yes, of course, this would have been a lot more potentially irksome and devastating when it takes place off the coast and in an area where it's ocean. Then there has to be some absolutely historical waves that accompany all this. Didn't happen. Yet on KCBS, the hysterical coverage of these two babbling anchors who didn't know what the hell was taking place and were relying on information provided by whomever was working behind the scenes, who should get an F. Maybe they were on their Facebook or Instagrams and only went on the computer, didn't make phone calls. We heard various experts talking about the potential for problems. They never surfaced. In fact, they had to issue, or take that back. They went and said there is no tsunami warning. And even if there had been, these two anchored like perhaps California was in danger, or at least off the coast up in Northern California. They didn't know what was taking place. Combine that with the fact that they sounded ridiculous, dead air, experts. This was the most comical thing that happened, and there were plenty. How about they take a call from various listeners, both Shafer and Guinness, from a resident of Antioch, who talked about his swimming pool acting strangely. His swimming pool in Antioch, which is obviously not near the coast, it's well inland. And they kept asking Margie Shafer in particular about his swimming pool, noticing that the waves in the swimming pool, folks, I'm paraphrasing, but this took place live on radio. Somebody screwed up behind the scenes at KCBS. Many people screwed up. But the guy was talking about his waves in his swimming pool in Antioch acting strangely, and them not missing a beat whatsoever, continuing on with this ridiculous interview. I started laughing. Antioch and a strangely acting swimming pool. Who's manning the ship? Somebody at KCBS, probably this news director who has run this station not better, but far worse, has to be shown the door, or maybe brought into the office and said, "What the hell is going on?" And look, when you have situations like this, God forbid again, we had something like this take place on land and not one of the quakes, which did happen on land, but it was in a very sparsely populated area. And although relatively non light, a 5.8 quake could be problematic, but it didn't happen in an area where there's lots of population. And they knew this. Hell, I even went on my computer when I got to my house and I looked, there weren't any big alerts. Of course, you get alerts on your phones. Our phones are programmed to provide that in this electronic age, in this iPhone age, but nothing as worrisome and as crazy as these two nincompoops. Sorry, but that's the truth, who don't know Bay Area history. Now, Shafer has been around. Margie, who I have commended in the past, knows the Bay Area, I think, as a native Bay Area person. Guinness, on the other hand, is a rookie. And I don't know what they see in this guy. He started out as a producer, then he was a traffic anchor, then he made his way to become the overnight news anchor. And then he became a sports anchor. He's like every trade. He's a five, what do they call it? A Swiss Army knife. This is what KCBS has come to. This guy, well, we know he's incompetent. We know he should not have been on the air. This is where you miss people like a Stan Bunger. And I was no big fan of Stan Bunger, but at least he had brevity. He had some background. He's credible. And he would have known right away, that this was not as crazy as they were making it out to be. And this is where editors, real producers, background people know a little bit of California history and all that. And they would have surmised that this was not the catastrophe in the making that it was made out to be. And these frantic anchors who in rush were frequently interrupted by dead air and guests that weren't on the air live. I mean, it was just a colossal, absolute ridiculousness taking place. Again, I'll commend the TV news stations who had reporters out there, obviously knew what was taking place, had witnesses and all that, and were not hysterical and broadcasting with this, like this amateur act that took place. And once again, clearly not ready for prime time, KCBS and its abundance of illogical anchors and reporters, one of whom was truly hysterical. Raquel Maria Dillon near the Golden Gate Bridge, acting as if a giant wave was about to erupt and swallow the bridge in San Francisco. Oh my God, what a total abomination.